Massachusetts Women's Political, the secretary of the Massachusetts Women's Political Caucus. And for 50 years, the MWPC has fought for equal representation for all women in government. As a nonpartisan, inclusive, and diverse organization, we organize from Boston to the Berkshires, from the North Shore to the South Shore. We're committed to increasing the number of women elected to public office and appointed to public policy positions. This is our third legislative Lunch and Learn. We decided to run this monthly series for two reasons. First, it's hard to know what's happening at our state house and who's making it happen. Second, outside of our own communities, it's difficult to really see the scope of the work being done. We're excited to offer a statewide venue for great leaders to talk about the work they're doing on behalf of all Massachusetts citizens. This month, we're focusing on climate change. We're joined by Representative Pat Haddad from the 5th Bristol District in the southeastern part of our state, by Joan Meschino from the 3rd Plymouth District, serving communities on the South Shore, by Amber Hewett from the National Wildlife Federation, where she is campaigns director, Offshore Wind Energy. And our moderator today is Deb Pasternak, the director of the Massachusetts chapter of the Sierra Club and a good friend of mine. These leaders share a passion for leading and supporting change through legislation on climate. And I'll turn it over to you, Deb, and I will also ask everyone, if you have a question, add it to the chat room because we're going to try to make 15 minutes at the end for questions. Okay.
Thanks so much, Celia. So hi, everybody. I'm Deb Pasternak. As Celia said, I'm thrilled to be here. I want to thank the Massachusetts Women's Political Caucus for the opportunity to hear from these amazing climate leader women, to hear some of the backstory on how they've been able to advance meaningful climate action here in Massachusetts. And I want to apologize for the immature family of titmice that just landed outside of my window. Sorry about that background noise. Anyhow, I want to dive right into this because we have so much to cover. Climate action is, as we all know, a super wide breadth of different policies and activities. So I just want to start with laying the land for how we get statewide climate action done in Massachusetts. And there's two main ways. One is through the legislator, getting the legislature to pass laws that are signed by the governor. And the second is through the governor's administration, one by the implementation of those laws, which is a very important step. And the second is by his own passing of executive orders and then implementing them. So, so that's just, the way that legislation and policies are done here in Massachusetts. But in the last 5 years, Massachusetts has enacted some nation-leading climate legislation and regulations, which all three of our panelists have played important roles in bringing to pass and implement. In today's discussion, we're going to talk about some of those laws and regulations, how we work to get them passed, and what still needs to be done. The backdrop to this conversation is the groundbreaking 2008 Global Warming Solutions Act, which set Massachusetts on a path with mandated emissions reductions and set the stage for the 2016 Act to promote energy diversity, which actually mandated the scaling up of utility scale offshore wind development for Massachusetts as part of our strategies to meet the mandated emissions reductions. I want to first turn to our panelist, Representative Haddad. You were an early leader helping to set the groundwork for scaling up offshore wind development, particularly in that act. My questions are, what made you pursue this initiative when Massachusetts had already squelched past offshore wind farm projects? And what was it like to get others on board?
Well, I think if you don't know, I have a very sordid past. Back in 2008, when when our bill first passed, it was horrifying to me because I had not one, but two coal-fired power plants that I was trying to keep alive. But thankfully, because of many people, I realized that coal should be a thing of the past. And so as we moved to close those plants, I also knew that we had to do something because all of the studying that I did showed that Massachusetts was one of the highest consumers of power in the country. Secondly, that we were overly dependent on natural gas. More than 50% of what we were using for power came from natural gas. And third, much more close to home, was that I had to do something about the tax revenue that had been lost to because of the 2 power plants that my town had depended on for years. So through the very, very generous help of many people, including Amber Hewett, I embarked on a road of, what do we do about this? And teach. And so many people I brought together. The joke is that people from all over literally the world were summoned, which is not true. I just invited them, but came to my little library, literally little library in Somerset to include me and to teach me about what we should be doing, what the future really should look like. And thankfully, I'm trainable. And so it was, I spent that summer listening and writing and truly having people help me write the legislation that ultimately became law. Then the stories get funny again, because I used to carry around this enormous box, and in the box there were 3-inch binders, 3-ring binders, with everything that I had learned over that summer. If I was in school, I would have gotten an A, I swear. But in the legislature, it's more like, okay, you've done the work. Now you have to convince everybody. And I will be very honest with you. People thought I was crazy. People are looking at me and saying, who are you kidding? You know, those jobs, that many jobs really don't exist. And the wind doesn't blow all the time. I mean, you all must remember the naysayers about, what it was going to do to the birds and the fish and go on and on and on and on. So every time I would go to an office, I would bring them a set of the 3-inch binders, which was probably a little horrifying. We had a new chairman of TUE, Telecommunications, Energy, and Utilities. We had a new secretary. And of course, the poor speaker was just like, you don't expect, when I brought it into him and started at my pitch, he said, you don't expect me to read that stuff, do you? But thankfully, he had smart young men who were able to read it. But it became, people would see me coming, and I would already see the shake of their head, like, oh, this one. And I kept saying to them, I'm telling you, it can happen, it can happen, it can happen. I was very fortunate to be taken to several European countries where it was happening. And then, people like Amber and the Audubon Society and so many very credible organizations got on board and said, yes, we can do utility scale offshore wind. And many of my discussions had to begin with, this is not Cape Wind, because Cape Wind had such, it just had such negative connotations. But I feel like I'm going on and on. I'll stop there because there's lots to the story, but I want to know what you want to know. And this panel contains, I'm sort of the one-trick pony of, offshore wind. Joan Meschino is, you'll find out, like, she's incredibly thoughtful and has thought of the big picture. And of course, Amber's been on the ground, literally dragging people kicking and screaming. And Amber, in some cases it is kicking and screaming to the conclusions that we have come to. So I'll save any more talking till I know exactly what you want to know, but that's kind of the crazy parts of my journey thus far. We're still on the way.
That's such a great story to hear, because it's true, like offshore wind at the time was completely new for the technology was completely new to this region of the world. And I'm very impressed that you just so doggedly taught yourself and advocated for it. And we are all beneficiaries of that work.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I wanted to just dive in a little bit more before we turn to Amber and Joan. I wanted to dive in a little bit more about because your town is a coal town, just what it was like to work with, what kind of concerns you took for your impacted fossil fuel workers, as knowing that you were transitioning towards wind. Just to hear a little bit about that kind of coalition building that you did.
So, first of all, they were in denial until the day the doors closed. They, the town and the workers felt that the town should buy the plant, the workers should do a co-op and buy the plant, and that we could keep it going. And it was I can't even tell you how difficult it was with the Board of Selectmen and so many people who kept telling me, no, it's too big to fail. It's too big to fail. Well, it had failed already, and we were just literally hanging on. So, thankfully, there were some great programs between the career shops and the career centers and Bristol Community College. We got a lot of the workers into programs, and some of them decided to really put their whole soul into it and went on to get degrees. The utilities, thankfully, looked at these people because there were 250 jobs that were lost in the bigger plant. And the utility companies realized that these were people that they could use. So I will say that many of them went on to get jobs with the utilities. As I said, a few were retrained for other industries, and the younger ones really threw themselves into the retraining. We did get some federal money, we did get some state money, but the process was very difficult for the town. And the town, unfortunately, is still experiencing a lot of anger, and they're not happy with how things have turned out. We've lost somewhere, at its height, it was, after when it was paying 50% of our whole tax base. In the waning years, it was paying $16 million, the plant. And so we're now down to a company who is paying barely over $600,000. So my town is still angry, and they don't actually believe that wind is coming because we haven't seen it. And since you asked, I'm going to say a very, very bad thing. Part of the problem, and if anybody here is friendly with this person that I'm going to talk about, I'm sorry, but he already knows how unhappy I am with him. The governor has not been helpful. The governor hasn't been helpful at all, because the whole idea behind wind was to create a new industry. And part of that was that there were opportunities for a supply chain, to be part of a supply chain. And the governor has decided that what he wants from the process is just a low price. And a low price is achievable and has been achieved, by the way, in Europe. But we're trying to build an industry. And because of that, we really need to give a little. I'm not saying we give away the store. I'm saying we give a little, so that we can get the benefits of, many of the pieces that will make up the industry. It's only there. We're not going to get 5 of everything. We're going to get 1 or 2 of everything. And much of that is right now going to other states. So, I'm angry with him. I'll be very honest. I've told him to his face. And I do think that Massachusetts is missing the boat. I mean, we're going to do fine on the green end of greening our power, but we're not doing fine on the promise that I thought was very clear in building this industry. So again, I'll stop because I can go on and on. It's sometimes I'm not well behaved.
No, that's awesome. Thank you so much. And I agree. And just for everybody on the call, this is where implementation is really important. So it's not, you can pass the law, but unless you get the governor to implement the law so that it does things like help build the regional economy, like those decisions were really made in the deals that were done with the offshore wind developers. And that's something that the governor's administration was in charge of. So this is the kind of thing why it's so important to advocate both to your legislature and to your governor to get climate work done in Massachusetts. I'm going to turn to Amber now quickly. Amber Hewett has just been leading Massachusetts in building coalitions of labor and economic development people and environmental advocates and legislators and public officials to build, like, number one, to create an understanding of what needs to happen in offshore wind, and then to advocate for that vision that Pat has been, that Representative Haddad is just so very well illustrated. Amber, if you could talk a little bit about your work, that would be wonderful.
Thanks so much, Deb. And it is just awesome to go down memory lane with you, Pat, and hear the story as we lived it. I mean, the joke at my office is name a problem and Amber will tell you how offshore wind can solve it, because it really is such a powerful opportunity. When I started my career, I moved to DC right after college to start with National Wildlife Federation. And within days of arriving there, I learned about this new campaign that was just, the seeds of it were just being planted for an offshore wind energy initiative. And it came from the fact that at that point, it was 2012, and a federal climate bill had just failed to pass the Senate. And our organization, like so many, were just considering, what is our next move on climate? What are with Congress off the table for a little while, what are the large scale game changing solutions that we can really get behind? And as a wildlife organization, with the added layer of solutions need to be done responsibly. And offshore wind jumped off the map, particularly in the Northeast region, as this incredible missed opportunity. We were at the time 20 years behind. We're now 30 years behind the start of this industry. And we, having grown up in Massachusetts and hearing the back and forth around Cape Wind for so long, I had always just assumed there was some good reason it wasn't happening. And that was my light bulb moment when I really dug into learning about offshore wind and realized that there was no economic or technological reason we weren't doing this. We have one of the best, most promising offshore wind resources in the world. And it was purely a lack of political will and political ambition. And so we started to think about how do we do this? What is it? Is it a state initiative? Do we need to start at the federal level? And as we dug in, we found out that there was a state representative in leadership in Massachusetts who thought this might be a good idea, and that Massachusetts might be the place that we could get started. So being from Mass, it instantly felt like the right project for me. I quickly moved back to the Commonwealth and was determined to just help make this happen. It's not just about, for me, I was driven to this issue by climate, but it solves so much more than that. This is an industry that can and will create thousands of high quality jobs. It is something that gives us, because of the scale of development, it gives us an opportunity to really rectify the mistakes of our past and the impacts disproportionately falling on low income and communities of color, and really advance an industry in a way that can be done right. Large scale development can have significant impact on wildlife. And so we're at the table making sure that that is not the case, that this is built in a way that is responsible, and that we as a wildlife organization can endorse. And the details of that really matter. So just to get to your point of implementation, Deb, it started with getting this bill passed, with getting people to believe in it, with labor leaders, large ratepayers who have to ride the volatility of the fossil fuel market and just be subjected to the fact that we have no control over the price of natural gas, and the rates spike with great regularity in New England, and that large scale clean energy investments help to provide a buffer to that volatility. So it's selling points to labor and to business and to our partners in conservation and to youth leaders and to environmental justice communities and organizations. There's something that can be here for everyone, but as Representative Haddad was saying, that won't happen naturally. This industry right now in Massachusetts is really driven to the lowest price point, which doesn't mean that we will maximize the benefits that it has to offer. And we were the leaders, we still are at the forefront, but other states are showing us other ways to do this. And we're able to draw lessons from places like New York and New Jersey and Virginia and Maryland and Connecticut. And they've all followed Massachusetts' lead, followed the lead of the bill that Representative Haddad got passed. And we should take a lot of pride in that. But there are now states that are getting more out of it than Massachusetts is poised to extract. And so that's where we are now, is really needing to shape this industry into something that can give everything that it has to offer, and to make sure that we secure all of the benefits that are really due after all of the hard work that's happened over the past decade.
Thanks so much, Amber. So just when we talk about the implementation and what that looks like, even though this is the legislative discussion, so does this mean that we work together to make the RFPs have different criteria so that there's more regional or at least Massachusetts economy building as part of the criteria of how we engage with our offshore wind development partners?
So we have an everything possible approach. We target every avenue to influence this industry. So one of them definitely being RFPs and weighing in with the Department of Energy Resources while they draft an RFP to just ask them to go above and beyond what the bill requires, and to really add community benefits and labor agreements and wildlife protections and environmental justice benefits in at that stage. So that's one we will always, that's an avenue we'll always travel. But we also have an opportunity to pass new laws and shape that continue to just add to build on what we've started here in Massachusetts, and require those parameters so that we don't need to ask for them at every solicitation. And then we also negotiate directly with developers. So there is there's a PR benefit to doing this well, and developers, for the most part, I will say, I think we've been fairly lucky with the cooperation that we've gotten from developers on a lot of our requests to do this right. On a wildlife front, for example, there's a potential impact on the critically endangered North Atlantic right whale if this isn't done responsibly. And so we've been fortunate that developers want to learn how to do this well, because frankly, I believe they don't want to have any negative impact on this species, but also because it's a very legally protected species. So while the regulation doesn't require them to meet the standards that would protect whales, there are other realities surrounding that really encourage them to come to the table. And we've reached agreements with Massachusetts offshore wind developers in the past. We hope to do this in the future. To just always ensure that the right measures are being taken, whether it is required in an RFP, passed into a new law, or voluntarily by the developers at play.
Thanks so much, Amber. And just for the last, before we switch over to a more general climate, the last offshore wind question is just, can you, just in case folks on the call don't know, can you just explain why it took so long for Vineyard Wind to finish their permitting process?
Well, I'm sure most could guess it had a little something to do with the former administration that I have stricken from my vocabulary, but it was really a combination of an unfriendly administration to the industry, but then also the strongest opposition to offshore wind, at least in this part of the country, comes from concern in the commercial fishing industry. And so there was a lot of pressure, particularly, I think, in a moment where they thought they really might be able to block this with an administration that wasn't enthusiastic about offshore wind. So there's a lot of pressure on and turnover in Interior Department, not unique to that department, but the administration did start with an Interior Secretary, Ryan Zinke, who actually was enthusiastic about offshore wind. So we had a couple of years where things were still moving forward. It looked like maybe Vineyard Wind might stay on schedule. But then when Secretary Zinke left and Secretary Bernhardt came in, that was a real turning point where the commercial fishing industry seemed to have really gotten through there. And so we got signal from the administration that it was maybe not heading in a great direction. And Vineyard Wind was, because things played out for so long and technology advances so quickly in this space, their proposal actually changed a bit over those years of waiting. And so they did need to pull out their permitting application and adapt to their proposal and resubmit it. So that added another round of a little bit of delay. But on a high note, my goodness, the Biden administration is incredibly enthusiastic and ambitious about this resource. We are very quickly making up for lost time. I've been working on offshore wind for over 8 years. I've never seen anything quite like it. I mean, we are seeing there was a backlog of permitting applications, more than 12 permitting applications deep that weren't moving for the past 4 years, and we've seen one a month get put on track for its permitting process. So announcement after announcement, a 30 gigawatt commitment from the Biden administration. That's enough offshore wind to power 15 million homes by 2030. So we are seeing the numbers that this industry really deserves and has to offer. So I think while it was a tough stretch on so many fronts, we're really in an entirely new day, and offshore wind is poised to bring us all that it can. And now it's up to us to just make sure we're getting it right.
Thank you so much, Amber. I'm going to now go back into just general climate legislation in our discussion. And so as we discussed, it was really because of the Massachusetts legislature's groundbreaking 2008 Global Warming Solutions Act that mandated the emissions reductions that made the legislature actually have to pass something to lower our emissions, which is where we got the incredible Pat Haddad pushing for the Energy Diversity Act, which scaled up offshore wind for Massachusetts. So that was from 2008. But by the time 2020 rolls around, it's clear that our 12-year-old mandated emissions reductions targets are no longer strong enough or ambitious enough to keep up with the growing speed of the climate impacts, nor the technologies available to help us mitigate our greenhouse gas emissions. So this is where our third panelist, Representative Meschino, jumps in and tackles the problem head on by introducing the roadmap bill into the last legislative session, and Representative Meschino, you laid the groundwork for the new emissions reductions targets that the state now holds. Can you tell us a little bit about the process of writing that bill, setting those goals and timelines, and just the process of writing that bill?
So first of all, thank you so much for including me. It's always a pleasure to be with Mass Women's Political Caucus, and I really need to give a quick shout out to Rep. Haddad, because since we're with all these fabulous women, just to come into the legislature and have a fantastic mentor, and someone like Pat Haddad is really makes these kinds of things possible. So hopefully everyone will give her a nice heart in her, to show how much we adore her. So you've asked a great question, Deb. When I first ran for elected office, so I came at it a little bit differently than, say, Rep. Haddad. I represent coastal communities, open ocean, as we've been dealing with coastal surges, sea level rise, intense storms of wind for decades. And so in my lexicon, things like adaptation and resilience are just regular words that we all understand and have been dealing with for quite a long time. And I was a selectwoman for quite a while. So it's just something that we've been dealing with for a long time. And I just feel that you don't have the right to ask for millions of dollars in seawall money and not work on the underlying issues. And so for me, running that first time, I was talking a lot about the adaptation and the resilience, but I made a strong commitment to my community and I ran on it that I would work on the mitigation pieces. And when I got into the legislature, which was just so exciting, we had just done a big bill in 2016, and I thought, oh my gosh, did I miss it? Like my chance to work in these spaces, because, women like Pat were doing this, and there were some really great bills. And there was actually a lot that had flowed from the Global Warming Solutions Act in the 10 years since it had been implemented. And we had terrific success actually transitioning off of coal and oil towards things like natural gas. But the question then becomes in my mind was, why did it feel stalled? And I kept asking this question, what was the plan? And through that sort of research and inquiry, I chanced to connect with the Conservation Law Foundation. And as you'll all remember, they had taken a lead in a series of litigation against the administration because things had really stalled. And they were really pushing for the it just happened to be the Baker administration to start to move forward. And when you really look at the Global Warming Solutions Act, you know, we had 10 years of experience with a lot of success, but we also had some really good experience around what were some of the barriers and what were some of the things that we could do better. And one of the big pieces was it was just written about energy, which was great because that was all of the work that Rep. Haddad was doing. And that Energy Diversity Act, and that was so critically important towards jumpstarting everything, greening the grid. But the question then became was how do you start to integrate it across other key emission sectors in Massachusetts? And that's where the drafting came in. And I partnered with Conservation Law Foundation in the drafting of it. And it was very thoughtful drafting. I mean, honestly, when I think back on it, like the thing that took us the hardest part was actually you know, the title. And, you know, we were very much looking to align with current mature science. That's the net zero goal. With we were very much looking to create strong interim targets because we're planning for 30 years, which is not something we traditionally do. It's not something we typically do well as government. We're planning for 30 years. And part of it, I mean, even the title, right, to pick, you know, a roadmap really put us in with what was going on in Europe. That's how Europe was talking about it. And they were, and as everyone knows, they're sort of just steps ahead of us. And so we were very much trying to put ourselves into that context. And then it was just a dialogue. 6 months before I didn't even know whether or not I would get reelected again. We had already drafted that bill and we were already going door to door. And anybody who would talk to me, National Grid, Eversource, Labor, the administration, the first place I went actually was the speaker, Speaker DeLeo, very much dialogue. Anybody who would listen to me and anybody who would give feedback. And it was actually really interesting to see like, the municipal light plants. They sat engaged with us, and then they ended up actually filing through Chairman then Chairman Golden their own clean energy standard. So like everybody, the whole point of the dialogue and that exercise was to start to get people to align so that we were all heading in the same policy direction. I'm just going to step back for a second and remind everyone, you know, most of the people on this call, you know, should give a shout out to Environmental League is here with Casey Bowers. And, you know, obviously there's a lot of people here who are very interested in climate and energy. And we experience climate change as public health, public safety, environmental health, environmental justice. We experience the problems in those ways, but the solution is actually economic. And that was the piece. So if you really look at hugely complicated and complex subject matter, that bill is actually perilously simple. And it's because it's not an environmental bill, it's an economic bill. It is the decarbonization of our economy. And so it's the implementation bill to the Global Warming Solutions Act. It is where we send the strong signal to all of the players and all of the key stakeholders what the state of Massachusetts intends to do. I did want to point out just 3 things about the drafting of that bill that has just, I don't know why, but it's not things that no matter how many times I say it doesn't come forward. Part of that bill was to require the state of Massachusetts, which they have done, to create a roadmap plan that integrates across all of the sectors. So like transportation, how we heat homes, and use of natural lands, industry, things like that. So it integrates across all of those sectors. And it really means that we're not doing these things, you know, one after the other, we're doing them concurrently and we're doing them together. It also required that we do 8 different plans and scenarios. So it was meant to be very much iterative, right? So that's why there's strong reporting requirements and regular feedback opportunities for the public. It's both for transparency, but also for accountability, you know, to both the public and to the legislature. But it's also meant to be iterative, right? So to your point earlier about technology, right? The whole point is to strive for innovation, because we know what we can do right now. It's how are we going to plan for 30 years? So I think that's one key piece, and that's a very technical document. It's on EEA's website, which is the agency that oversees all of the different divisions for the green, for our green efforts and our green agencies. So you can take a look at it, and then now we're doing the next 10-year plan, which is the 2030 Clean Energy Climate Plan. The third piece of that's so important about that bill, though, is that in the law, we require the state, we require the administration to do all of that analysis with an equity lens. Now, when I speak on that, I usually talk about it as a people-centric lens, because equity scares people. I don't know why, but it's really meant to say that as you're taking your strategies, that you will look to see what the impacts are on low income, on and environmental justice communities, on race, on, you know, what, across the board, to think about through an equity lens. And the reason part of the reason I mention it is because you have to build those pieces into it. And but to Rep. Haddad's earlier point, you can't just then leave the legislation. So for my part, it ended up being the vehicle for a lot of other really beautiful pieces of legislation that came along. But in my mind, it's just a starting point. Now is when all of the work begins. And now is when we really have to do two things. The first piece is we have to push the administration. I will share in Rep. Haddad's remarks about the governor. He's thinking about what he has to do. The whole point of drafting the interim goals, and I'm the one that picked the 50%, right? We decided it was going to be 50, 75, it would be a straight line, it would be a floor, right? So if the science showed we needed to do something more aggressively, we could. It was just meant to be a floor. And part of the reason we picked 50% is because I felt we originally thought about a range, but I felt very strongly that it be a hard and fast number, a target that we would all internalize and strive for. And we picked 50% because we knew that 45% we intuited we could kind of get there. And it's the 5%, that delta, is what pushes and drives innovation. And honestly, if you read the governor's remarks over the past several months, as that bill was being negotiated between the legislature and the administration, you remember it came back and forth a couple of times. You know, he kept saying like, well, you know, it has to be 45% because, you know, that if at 50%, that means this many cars, we can't do that. And so it is going to be incumbent upon all of the key stakeholders to push them, because they are only going to do that which they are required to do, and no more and no less. So we really have to, this is where we start. And I'm always happy to talk about my legislative priorities, but in fact, I've already filed a series of bills, 3 of them around electrification of fleet vehicles, around electrification of personal vehicles, a mandate to switch over to no more new internal combustion registrations by 2035, again, aligning us with, you know, really with the, what the broader federal government's doing, California is doing, what the industry is doing, right? It's not like I'm making this stuff up or picking it out of the thing. It's all about making sure that we align and head in the same direction. And likewise, we also, there's a series of bills, and I also filed a first-time file on how we decarbonize our buildings. And there's a lot in there, and I can talk about it more, but that could be like its own whole discussion. But the point is that we have to start tackling some of these other sectors. And these are two sectors that I just feel are very strongly, there's urgency around it, because with vehicles, right, we change over vehicles, right? Well, I don't, but most people buy new cars like every 3-5 years, sometimes 7 years. Like I still get one from 2008. But setting me aside, it's an opportunity. And so you have to do things like point of sale rebates so that regular people like us can actually afford, we don't have to buy a Tesla, right? And you have to make investments in your infrastructure so that it's actually doable. And the same thing with housing. It's in some ways there's more urgency there, because everything you build that doesn't comply with the new law will be, it's not just, well, it's stranded costs, right? It's like, so you want to make sure that all of your new building is looking forward to new building standards, to energy standards. And right now, those are just optional, right? We don't even know what BBRS will come up with, right? So again, we have to be pushing, and then we have to think about the deep retrofits on the back end, like how you get the old housing stock. So anyway, I don't mean to talk so much about the details. The last thing I'll just mention is that one of the other issues I take exception with the governor is he does not fund this work. I'm very proud as a House member that we did in this last budget round add 5% to the green budget line item. I'm embarrassed to tell you that I didn't look to see what the Senate did, but I know our Senate partners value that work in those agencies as well, and so I'm sure that they will do at least that, if not more. So, there's another avenue where we just have to push the governor and make sure that he is living up to the laws we have put in place. And so anyway, I'll stop there. And I'm always happy to take questions and chat about this as long as you'd like.
Yeah, thank you so much. That was really amazing. And you're right on about that. We need to work cross sector. And right now, the main emission sectors are buildings, transportation, and the electricity generation sector. But there's also other pieces like what our natural habitat plays in the carbon budget as we plan the roadmap. So thanks so much for number one, for writing the bill. And then number two, for just being so clear about the fact that that's not where the story ends. Passing, while we were happy to see the bill pass, it actually did create a whole bunch more work, because now we have to implement all that great language.
I mean, one of the nice parts is there are wonderful coalitions out there, and there are a lot of people doing work through the IAC, which is the Implementation Advisory Committee. And, I feel like that's a great place for people to continue to work and to focus. But there's some really, some lovely legislation that our colleagues have filed. And I encourage everyone to take a look. I mean, everything from carbon pricing to, it's all really, some really good stuff out there. So. So happy to do the work, and we can't do it alone, and grateful for the support from organizations like the Sierra Club and Environmental League of Massachusetts. And I have to give a shout out to Elders Climate Action. They're one of my favorite grassroots organizations. They're just so fantastic, and they do the work. And so there's I'm not mentioning so many wonderful ones like the Nature Conservancy. I mean, there's a huge list of people really working and aligning in this space.
Yeah, it is amazing. I had one more question that I just want, and I just lost it because I listened to you.
Sorry.
No, I know it was, but it's absolutely true. There's an incredible ecosystem, I like to call it, of environmental, labor, youth, economic development groups that are all working. And it's funny because I often got asked when I first started working with Sierra Club, people would say, well, how do you feel about all these other groups, the Clean Water Action and, that are doing this same thing that you're doing? And the way that I describe it is, before I was in advocacy long ago, not that long ago, I was a singer-songwriter. And you can't play all the venues every night, right? To keep the venues going, there actually needs to be thousands of artists. And you hope that the people go see the artists that they resonate with. And it's kind of the same thing to get this ecosystem of the renewable energy transition happening here in Massachusetts. There's a whole ecosystem of advocates and legislators and, just citizens and residents who are doing the work. So anyways, I really appreciate, all like Casey Bowers, who's on here from ELM and all of our Massachusetts Women's Progressive Caucus. All of these groups together are working together to bring about a real meaningful change for Massachusetts.
Well, and just to sort of amplify what you're talking about is, you don't just and Haddad can speak to this too, is you're not just one person, right? So I might be the tip of the spear. I might be the person in the building that's managing sort of the constituencies. And I went door to door with all of our, I think I met with like 110 of our colleagues. I really went door to door. And anybody who would sit and listen to me, and it is, you cross the line sometimes over into stalking. I mean, it's like a little embarrassing sometimes. But honestly, do you know how the reason I get those meetings is because the advocacy organizations go and have in meetings with their representatives and their senators, and they say to them, and what I asked them to say was, we think this is an important issue. And I'll, listen, I'll own it. The 2050 roadmap bill was not anybody's top priority. It was everyone's shared priority. And what happened, and the person I think we probably owe the most thank you to is Representative Smitty Pignatelli. He was the chair of NRA, and I asked him for an early hearing. He gave it to me. I asked him to report it out early to give me a long ramp. And so the 2050 roadmap was the bill that was in House Ways and Means. It was the bill that was moving. And it was a shared priority. It wasn't a top priority. But everyone got behind it because then that meant if you could get it to move, then everything would move with it. And I think everybody understood that. And so, I can't understate how, or I can't overstate how important the advocacy community was, and have that ecosystem there to be going in and just saying, we think this is really important. Just, touch base with the rep and let everyone know we think it's important. So yeah, Western Mass is so lucky to have Smitty Pignatelli, but I'm sorry, you want to ask more questions.
Thanks so much. And just really quickly, for the folks on the call that aren't trying to get legislation passed every session, one piece to know, kind of what Rep. Meschino is saying, is that, there may be like 4 different bills filed on the same issue, and then they all get kind of amalgamated into one vehicle that passes through. So her bill really served as that vehicle last session, and it was an amazing vehicle at that. So I want to go ahead and ask let's see, Andrea Chasen, I hope I'm pronouncing your name right, to unmute yourself and ask your question.
Yeah, thank you very much for this. It's wonderful to see like-minded and passionate people doing this great work, so thank you. My question is, I live out here in Western Mass, and Eversource is trying to expand and increase its supply of gas, and we are in the middle of trying to deal with the a project that does not seem to go away, and we seem to get very little traction. So part of it is that the fossil fuel industry is, of course, not cooperating in terms of reducing its supply of fossil fuel. It is increasing it, and it's looking for markets to do so. So my question is, what can the legislature do to really push the fossil fuel industry to get on board so we do hit that 50% cap? We didn't make the 20% cap for 2020 that we had under the Global Warming Solutions Act. My guess is we're not going to if we keep allowing the expansion of fossil fuel, and the Department of Public Utilities has not been a great friend to any of this. So my sense is that the legislature needs to step up and do something, hearings, force the issue. How are they going to move into the 21st century and become profitable on renewables? I don't know. I'm looking to you guys for your answers and your assistance and your wonderful help, because believe me, we could use it out here.
Great question, Andrea. Thank you so much. Do any of the panelists want to address that question?
So I'll just quickly say that we are seeing, albeit not a big move, but we are seeing a move that the distributors are partnering with offshore wind. Excuse me, too much pollen. And that's, to me, that's a good sign, because they realize that that's where the large utility scale of power is going to be coming from. The problem is that in the short term, people choose natural gas as their heating fuel. And so that's the argument that's been made to me. Now, I can't speak for anybody else, but the argument that's been made to me is that people should not be told what kind of fuel they should have to use to heat their homes. Joan, as I said in the chat, has a better big picture view of how to get there. But that's going to be one of the slowest realized goals, I would say. And I don't know if anybody wants to add to it, but it's really hard to get down to the individual person to make them feel secure that electrifying their homes with heat and everything is the right thing to do, because full electric homes had a really, really bad rap for many years. And so I think it's a 1-to-1 education. And one of the, Joan was talking about things that didn't pop out in her bill. One of the things that was a big piece of our bill was working on storage. And it's kind of fallen by the way, although, I mean, there's a decent program, I guess, if we go back to the administration, but we're not doing what they're doing in Europe around storage. And storage is going to lead people, ordinary people, to feel confident that they can electrify their whole home. And so, it's not going to be, Andrea, it's not going to be easy. There's no doubt in my mind.
I echo everything that Pat just said. And, one of the things I would just add is that, thank God we have a new administration at the federal level, because one of the other problems, one of the other challenges we have is that many of these projects that you're referring to are actually cited at the federal level. And so as long as agencies like FERC are just, and there's federal legislation that actually says, thou shalt permit this, and unless there's a good reason not to. And so they just, I think about a project in my own neck of the woods, the Weymouth compressor station, is they just went ahead and permitted, and then they turned to the administrations at the state level, and they say, you have the opportunity to weigh in these few spaces. And that's one of the reasons why the environmental justice language was so important. Like my bill just said, you're going to look at it through this equity lens, and it says environmental justice, but it was Michelle Dubois' bill that actually defined it. And when you really look at how that bill's written, part of it is saying, you can't just dump it into the same places. You have to look at the total impacts of all of the things. And so now you really can start to get at not just whether this project in the abstract works, whether there's need for it and things like that. And FERC has some new people on it, and is starting, they just reopened the docket on the Weymouth compressor station. And I saw this is the second Court of Appeals overturned, someone overturned an actual compressor station permit. Ours is built, I think we might be stuck with it, but there is change coming in some of those places. The only other thing I'll just say is, keep in mind that we are in a transition period of 30 years. And so natural gas is not going to get turned off at the state line anytime soon. As Amber was talking about, it takes time to build these and to permit these. You do the procurement, you do the permitting, and then you do the building. And we are also going to have to do a lot around grid modification and upgrades so that we can do it. So we try not to be too hard on the people that choose or keep, their natural gas right now, because it's just there's a lot of work to be done. But to your point, Andrea, and I think what's so important about your question is, you don't want to start investing in new carbon-based infrastructure, because that's when you really are going to get all your stranded costs, and then it's just going to cost us 100 times more. So it's really how to start that transition. And when I mentioned the bill about housing and transportation, that's why I say there's urgency, because you just don't want to spend a damn penny that you don't need to spend now. So anyway, I hope that answers the question.
Thanks so much, Joan. Rep Meschino, thank you so much. And Andrea, I just wanted to add that, you know, the S9 bill, the climate bill that did pass, actually mandated the state's DPU and other energy decision-making bodies to include community impacts as well as greenhouse gas emissions into their energy siting decisions. And so while, again, the implementation, like how that's going to be enforced, is still up for decision and activism, at least the intention of the law is that they can't just go ahead into a community and increase some sort of fossil fuel infrastructure without taking those considerations into the approvals of the projects. So anyhow, I am looking at the clock and realizing that we're at 12:57. I just wanted to thank everybody for attending this. We could well go on for another hour. I had questions specific to buildings and transportation that we didn't get to. But before we say goodbye, I just wanted to ask anybody on the panel if they have any kind of parting words, and to just say them. Thank you.
So I'll just say thank you, and please continue your advocacy. This is really it's a big process. It's going to require, as I said, in many instances, a one-to-one conversation. And, you know, there's so much to it. Joan mentioned environmental justice. We didn't even get into that. And that's a huge part of the whole process. So please keep up the good work, MWPC. And I'm always here to try to be helpful.
I would just echo what Pat just said. This was great. It's just so exciting to see everyone's interests, and just thank you as an organization for supporting women in elected office and in leadership. You know, not for nothing, if you could get a few more, then we can really rock and roll.
Well, I wanted to be sure to go last year so that I could thank both Rep Meschino and Rep Haddad. It really is an honor to be on a panel with both of you. And I tell everyone that I come into contact with how much of a difference it makes to contact your legislators. And I know that sometimes that can feel discouraging to hear, because people do contact their legislators and don't always feel that it makes an impact. But when I say it, I'm always thinking of leaders like you, and that I know that we are making a difference because we have such great allies in the building moving this forward. So it only happens together, and I'm just so grateful for both of you. And thank you to MWPC for getting more women like these two elected, and let's just keep going. Thanks so much.
Thanks so much, everybody. And we'll say goodbye.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Great
Deb.
job. Loved it.
No. I'll just say, as everyone's leaving, we have some new programs coming up. Check out our website. We're starting a new series called Master Classes, The Art of Campaigning. And we get started next Tuesday night with a topic that's near and dear to my heart, which is demystifying digital advertising and really targeting voters with a smart social media campaign. Thank you. Thank you, Kat.